And today I will be replacing Peter Harwich, that unfortunately cannot be with us today. So we organize this kind of webinars every approximately 2 months. So that's the 8 sessions. We give a great importance to declaring personal costs, but because we have detected that most errors are in this kind of cost statements. So we are announcing all of them in the new section of the Funding and Tenders portal. Next one will be most probably in April, so you are welcome to follow us. We also organize trainings on Horizon Europe. So the last one is, it was on grant agreement preparation, end of January. There will be a new one probably at the beginning of March on dissemination and exploitation. It will be announced most probably next week. You are always welcome to attend. You don't have to register, just pass by and have a look. Probably you will learn a few things about Horizon 2020. These ones on Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe are, as I said, every 2 months, and every month the ones on Horizon Europe. So today we have a small agenda, just 2 topics. One is the legal part. It will be half an hour, and another presentation on a more practical part, audit related. That will be another half an hour, and after that we will have questions. We will manage the questions through Slido. You have to use the code COSTS 2020, that's COSTS 2020 all together. And what you have to do is to first write your question there, but first actually, before writing your question, please have a look at the different other questions that are already there. If there is a similar question to yours, just like it. So at the end of the session, we will dedicate 1 hour for all the questions, and we will go through the number of likes. So the first presentation will be today from a lawyer from the European Commission, from DG Research and Innovation. It's David Mejuto. David Mejuto is here with us. He is working actually on Horizon 2020, and he will explain us the legal basis of the personal costs. Thank you, David. You're welcome to take my place.
Good morning. Well, good morning, everybody, to this COVID-safe webinar. We are broadcasting from Brussels, as you have realized. My role today is to speak about the personal costs in Horizon 2020. And even if Manuel said that it would take me some half an hour, I'm going to try to do it shorter so that we concentrate on the questions that you may have, because it is not today's intention to go through every single small little item of the personal cost. That will take us probably more than the triple of the time that Manuel have indicated, but to concentrate really on the main aspects to avoid that you may fall into errors when preparing your cost declarations for Horizon 2020. Actually, this morning I was updating my paper copy, can you imagine, my paper copy of the annotated model grant agreement. If you don't know why it is, don't worry, we will speak more about it in a few minutes. And I have realized that the explanations for the personal cost take something like about 30 pages in the annotated model grant agreement. You may say that is a lot. But if you compare it with the 300 and nearly 80 pages that the full explanations on the Horizon 2020 grant agreement takes within this annotated model grant agreement, and if you think that probably around 3/4 of the cost and nearly as much of the errors in Horizon 2020 grants are concentrated into the personal cost, probably these 30 pages, even if it take a while to read them through, are not that big and not that much of an effort. But in any case, today, as I was saying, I'm going to concentrate on the typical issues that might raise mistakes when you are preparing your cost declarations concerning personal costs in Horizon 2020. Let's see if we do it right. First indication. Well, if you are today or in a near future connected to this webinar, refreshing your memories of it, it's probably because you have a Horizon 2020 grant agreement ongoing. Well, the Horizon 2020 program, as you can see in the slide, ran it from 2014 until 2020. but it doesn't mean that it's over. That was the time when the program finished. But we still have grant agreements to sign, and for the next year, you will be implementing the grant agreements that you have signed until the end of the program. The message now is that remember that whatever we are going to explain today to you about Horizon 2020 does not apply to Horizon Europe. As Manuel explained it, you already have available some other presentations about Horizon Europe, and very soon we will concentrate on explaining what are the cost conditions, the reporting obligations, et cetera, for Horizon Europe in a wave of other webinars. Today is Horizon 2020, and also if incidentally you still have alive any FP7 program, the same logic applies. So what I'm going to tell you today about personnel costs does not concern FP7, does not concern Horizon Europe, it's only Horizon 2020. And even within Horizon 2020, I must say that I'm not covering everything of it, because we are going to be focusing these explanations on personnel costs in cost reimbursement grant agreements. So where you have to calculate your actual costs in accordance to the rules of the grant agreement. You may know that we have other types of grants, like the lump sum grants, which is just a fixed amount. So there you don't have to calculate how to declare your costs during the reporting, or like the Maria Sklodowska-Curie Action grants, where it's a unit cost, it's a fixed amount that becomes already determined in the grant agreement, and you just use that fixed amount. So there are no complications and there are no these financial mistakes. That's the reason why today we are only working concentrated on the personnel costs in cost reimbursement grants. So the first element about personnel costs is, well, who can I declare as personnel costs in my cost declarations for Horizon 2020 grant agreements? Well, I think that the first indent is the most logic. Of course, your employees are your personnel costs. There are no doubts there. Employees, by the way, also means if you are attending this webinar from a public entity, when we say employees, it also means public servants, civil servants, sorry. So these two categories are automatically included in the personnel costs. But you can also declare as your personnel costs seconded staff. For instance, if a professor comes from a different university to work for you, if you are a university into the project, you can also declare the cost of this person as your personnel cost, even if you don't pay directly this person. On top of it, if you are an SME, a small and medium-sized enterprise, and if the SME owner is participating in the project, but is not an employee of the SME, so he or she does not have a salary from the SME, you can also declare the cost of these persons as your personal cost. And finally, but this is subject to conditions, you might also be able to declare as your personal cost the cost of other persons that work for you, but that are not your employees. This is the case, for example, of some types of consultants. We'll have a few words more on this in the next slides. And this is personnel costs in Horizon 2020. You may think that it's horribly complex. It is, in any case, quite a dense tree of options. That's true. The reason for it is that we have had to adequate the Horizon 2020 grant agreement to the many different options and situations that take place around Europe. So the biggest difficulty when calculating your personal cost in Horizon 2020 is probably to find your way within this tree of different options. To simplify this task, we have already marked there for you what we consider to be the easiest way to calculate them. It doesn't mean that you must go down that line. You may take the other options. You will see a bit more of information about these different options in the next slides, but I will, through the other slides, all the time address you to what we consider and has proven to be the less error-prone of the options within this tree to calculate the personal cost. So don't be scared. It might look difficult, but it's because you are looking at every single possible way that you may have to calculate personal costs. And at the basis, it's extremely simple. The logic that you can easily follow is that the personal costs in Horizon 2020 are calculated simply by multiply the number of hours that the person worked in the project, in the Horizon 2020 action. And for these unit time records, I'm going to insist several times on this, by an hourly rate, so X euros per hour. And you don't need to invent a formula for the hourly rate. It also comes within the grant agreement. So when you sign the grant agreement, in the text of the grant agreement, the explanations about how to calculate this hourly rate are already there, clearly detailed. And beyond that, you also have the detailed explanations, developments, and examples about this calculation in the annotated model grant agreement. I will keep on repeating this annotated model grant agreement several times. I will give you the link at the end in case that you don't know it. So hours worked in the project multiplied by an hourly rate. Keep this in your mind because we are going to now explain in a bit more of detail these two elements. The first, hours worked in the project. Horizon 2020, you need timesheets. You need timesheets, you need timesheets. Keep this in mind. We will keep it repeating. It slightly changes in Horizon Europe, but as you have already understand by now, Horizon Europe is going to be a different story. We'll have separate presentations, we'll have different grant agreements, so it does not concern today our presentation. Horizon 2020, you need time records. There is one exception for persons working exclusively in the action. You can read about that in the annotated grant agreement. By default, keep in mind timesheets. And you don't need to record all the hours. You just need to record the hours that the person works in the Horizon 2020 action. So it's not that we are imposing you something beyond what is necessary to calculate the personal cost. And there, in your timesheets, you cannot declare budgeted time. So it's irrelevant if at the beginning you estimated that the person will work 3 months in the project and eventually you needed 6. You cannot declare the budgeted time. You must declare the reality of the time worked in the action. Similarly, you cannot declare estimated time. So it's not about at the end of the year, well, I think that the person worked 500 hours in the project and I declare these 500 hours. It does not work like that. You cannot declare estimated time. And you cannot declare either, and this happens in some specific contracts, a percentage of the time of the person. So it's not enough to say, well, in the contract of this person, the employment contract, we have put that the person will work 25% of the time in this grant agreement. It's not enough. You need to declare, record, and declare systematically the reality of the time that the person worked in the Horizon 2020 actions. So, once again, and for the last time now, remember that you need, in Horizon 2020, timesheets for the hours declared to the grant. So the other side of the formula is the hourly rate. Now that we know how many hours the person has worked in the action, we need to determine the hourly rate. And it is the grant agreement who tell us, well, you will calculate the hourly rate by simply dividing the personal cost of the person by the number of productive hours. What you can put in the personal cost, you're looking there on the slide, is the real salary of the person, the social security contribution, taxes, and other costs that are included in the remuneration of the person that arise from national law or the employment contract. Okay? Be very careful about things like gifts or bonuses that are given not based on objective conditions, premiums, that might be delicate and in many cases might not be eligible. So keep in mind that these are the elements that you can put within the calculation of the hourly rate in the personal cost. Then we need to divide this personal cost by the number of productive hours. And you remember the tree with all the options? Well, there are 3 options for the number of productive hours. The first option, the one that we recommend, the simplest, the less risky, is 1720, so 1,720 hours per year. It doesn't matter in reality if the person actually works more hours in total than the 1720 or less hours than the 1720 in total. You can always use 1720. If the person works part-time, you will do a pro rata corresponding to the part-time. If the person is employed just for 6 months, it's going to be just half of this 1720, so also a pro rata of this 1720. But any beneficiary, any one of you can use the 1720 hours to calculate the hourly rate of the person to charge the cost to the Horizon 2020 grant agreements. It might be possible that you don't like it, for instance, because you already have your own methods to calculate annual productive hours. You're a big company, you're a big institution, and you have cost accounts, and you yourself said, well, yeah, I'm already doing this my way, and want to keep this system. For that is the standard. You see this option that is in your left bottom corner of the slide. And you also can calculate it person per person, taking into account the number of hours that the individual person worked during the year. We put these two options there, are also open. They are subject to conditions. If you don't like or you prefer not to use the 1720, please check carefully how and under what conditions you can use one of the other two options. Then the next question is, now I know that I have to multiply the number of hours by an hourly rate. And how many times do I have to do this? How many times do I have to calculate an hourly rate? Well, the main, again, branch in our tree, the main option and the one that is the simplest, and because it is the simplest and the less risky we recommend, is do it once in each financial year. So just once at the end of each financial year, you calculate your hourly rate by dividing the annual personnel cost by the annual productive hours. That's very simple. Normally, you have already these global amounts because of your statutory accounts or because of the tax declaration, so it's very easy. Now, if you want, there is a small downside on this main approach, that is that when at the end of the reporting period, the financial year is still ongoing. For instance, your financial year ends in December and the reporting period ends in March, the year after. You will have to use for these last months, these months of the ongoing financial year, the hourly rate of the previous full financial year, your last closed financial year. So you will not be able to calculate hourly rates for a fraction of a year, which implies that if there is a salary increase at that moment, well, it's not going to be reflected immediately in the hourly rate. It's going to be for the next reporting period when you will see this hourly rate updated, if you want. Well, there are cases in which beneficiaries told us, well, look, this is not my normal way. I want another option, or I'm not happy with this because, okay, the ongoing financial year in your example is 3 months, but it might be 11 months. And if there is a significant increase in the salary, well, we will be able to recuperate more EU funding if we will have different approaches. For instance, this second option that we have allowed now in the Horizon 2020 grant agreements, that is to calculate the hourly rate per month. So rather than doing for each person an hourly rate at the end of the year, you will do 12 hourly rates, one in each month, by dividing the monthly personnel cost by the monthly productive hours. If you go down the line, if you say, well, I indeed prefer, I don't care, it doesn't matter for me all this additional administrative work because of the monthly calculations, I insist 12 rather than 1 in a year, I want to go down the line, again, please check carefully in the annotated model grant agreement the explanations for this monthly hourly rate, because there are some specific conditions that make the calculations in some cases slightly more difficult than the the calculation based on the full financial year, so more prone to errors. The option is there. We recommend you going to the annual because it's simplest, it's simpler, and it implies less administrative burden. But if you want to check the other, if you want to see how it works, the information is available in the annotated model grant agreement. Now, there are 2 ceilings that apply to your personal cost declarations. In reality, the 2 ceilings are based on the principle that the grant agreement, the grant itself, can never result in a profit for you. So we are covering costs, right? So if you are making a profit, we are going beyond what has been your actual cost. That would not be possible. To ensure that we respect this general rule of not making any profit out of the grant, there are a double ceiling on your personal cost declaration. The first side of the ceiling is that you can never declare in a year, in total, in all EU grants together, more hours than the number of hours that you have used to calculate the hourly rate, so the number of the annual productive hours. So if I took option 1, 1720, and I calculated my hourly rate based on these 1720 hours, I can never declare in EU grants in a year, in total, for that person, more than 1720. Even if in reality, for whatever reason, the person working more hours. It is irrelevant, because when you divide by 1720 and multiply by 1720 again, it implies that you have already charged the full personal cost of this person in that year to EU grants. That's the reason why, even if the person works more hours, you have to stop declaring them to EU grants. And immediately related to this, we also have the second condition that says that the total of the personal costs declared for reimbursement as actual costs in EU and Eurotown grants in a year cannot be higher than the total personal cost for this person in your accounts. So it's the same logic. You cannot make a profit, you can never declare more than the total of the personal cost of the person. After that, you may say, well, still it looks rather complex, and there is a lot of math to make these calculations, and there are the ceilings and the options, and I'm a bit scared of making mistakes and having to pay back later on. That's dangerous. Well, what we have done to help you in that situation, or for instance, it also happens that you are just a one-time participation in Horizon 2020, and you are worried that you might be missing some elements. We have prepared a wizard, so an IT tool to support the calculations that verifies automatically this double ceiling and helps you through your choices. You have there the entry point to this wizard tool, which is available at the time of your reporting, so the financial reports, okay? You see there this magic one, which will give you the access to the wizard, which is not mandatory. You may use it, you may not use it, it's your choice. It's available for you. We have done it to help you with the calculations and all the conditions, but if you prefer to do it yourself on your way, on your own, not on your way, the way is the one in the grant agreement, that's fine. But if you want, the possibility is there. Now, to wrap up my part of the presentation today, we are going to tackle a few special cases with a couple of key messages. So let's imagine that you are in a situation. Here we have two persons. One is representing our side, one is representing your side. And you say, well, look, I want to pay more to my employees than the normal salary when they work in this prestigious grant. Our reply will be, well, if the only moment in which, and the only occasion in which you do that is when participating in Horizon 2020 or even in European Union grants, we cannot accept it because we want to contribute to your cause in the normal way that you do it. So paying the normal remuneration, participating to your normal policies, travels, etc. So if it is just for us, it's not possible, okay? We will just cover up to the normal basic salary. It can be, however, that you reply, but the thing is that I always do this when it is a prestigious grant. So my internal rules go into saying that when there is an important prestigious grant, we will pay more to the person. Well then, and this is the message, it might be possible. We call this project-based remuneration, but there are specific rules that you need to apply. And if there is something that we unfortunately have to recognize that is somehow complex about Horizon 2020, is this project-based remuneration. So don't be surprised, don't be scared, but if you are in this situation, here really I must insist that you check very carefully what are the explanations in the annotated model grant agreement, and remember that you can always contact us. I'll tell you how in a couple of slides in case of doubts. Two other specific cases. Remember that I explained to you that it was possible to declare as personal cost the cost of the SME owner, so the owner of an SME who is the beneficiary, the SME the beneficiary in the grant agreement. If this owner is not an employee, in some countries it's not possible to be an employee of your own company. So if this owner is not employee but participates in the grant agreement, so works directly in the grant agreement, in the action, in the project itself, we accept that the time of this SME owner is valorized and can be charged to the Horizon 2020 action via what we call a unit cost, which actually is an hourly rate that is fixed by the Commission and that will appear directly in your grant agreement. The difference, I insist, is if it is an employee, it follows the same logic that all the other employees. If it is an SME that is an SME owner that is not an employee, then you have this unit cost, even if the person is paid by any other means, including service contracts or whatever non-employment contracts. In those situations, it's always the SME owner unit cost that applies. And finally, the last special case that I wanted to name here is the case of consultants. Remember that, as said in the second slide, that in many cases, or in some cases, you can also charge as your personal cost people who works in the project but are not your employees. They are working to you via other type of contracts, a service contract typically, or any other type of labor contract, but not employment one. Well, this is possible, but it's not always, and it's not systematic. It's not because you hire a consultant on personal basis that you can declare the cost of the person as your personal cost. So here, please check the Article 6282 and the explanations in the annotated model grant agreement, because even if very often they can still be declared as personal costs, there are some cases and some circumstances under which you will have to declare them as subcontractors, worst scenario, or purchase of services. So if you have this type of consultants, be careful, check it carefully, do it right from the beginning. Don't wait for an auditor to correct you and recover the money. So this is going to be my last slide, and it is about where you can find more information about everything that I have explained and many more issues that today we didn't have the time to get into details. First message, you have heard me speaking several times about this Horizon 2020 annotated grant agreement. This is really the book where everything is explained. Whenever we have questions, we use exactly this information to reply to your questions. So same document for you, same document for us. It's full of examples, detailed explanations, and it also contains the articles, so the parts of the grant agreement to which the explanations refer. It is available through the portal, and you have a direct link here in the slide. More in detail, if you want to go into details about the practical implementation, the procedures, etc., so beyond the legal provisions of the grant agreement, you have the Horizon 2020 online manual, also available through the portal, and here with the link that is in the slide. And it might be perfectly possible that after reading, it's still not clear one element or another aspect, and you want more information. It also happens to me. In that case, you can, first of all, contact your national contact points. These are people who is specifically dedicated in your country to reply to questions about Horizon 2020. They know your language, they speak your language, they know your particularities, and they are particularly knowledgeable about certain aspects of Horizon 2020. Your national contact points, the details, the contact details are available also in the portal. So through this link also, and at the end, you have also the possibility to contact us directly, the Commission directly, via the Research Inquiry Service, where you can submit your question, your specific question is going to get arriving to me, my colleagues, sorry, depending of the area to which the question refers, and you will get a written answer by email directly from the Commission. And this is it. I stop here with this part of the presentation. I will pass the floor now to my colleague Soren, who will speak about the audit dimension of Horizon 2020, and we will have plenty of time at the end to reply to your questions. Thank you very much. See you later.
Thank you very much, David. We are receiving plenty of questions for you, but we are first going to listen to Soren. Sorin will have a very practical presentation about how to avoid errors in the personnel costs in Horizon 2020. Sorin is an auditor, actually, from the Directorate General for Research and Innovation here at the European Commission. Sorin, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I will quickly present to you the audit perspective, let's say, for Horizon 2020 grants. What we see in practice and so on. But first of all, we'll go to some introduction and speak about the errors. What do they occur? Why do they occur? Of course, misunderstanding of the rules. That's the part where David kindly presented to you the bigger tickets. And then, of course, lack of attention to the detail of the provisions of the grant agreements. And there, I really recommend you to go through the annotated grant agreement, read carefully, and really pay attention to the details or to the specificities you are looking for, because there are many guidelines included. And of course, intentionality as well, that can explain why some errors can occur. The consequences of error are, of course, negative ones for beneficiaries. This can be the non-optimal use of funding available, and this may lead as well to recoveries, of course. Not only for beneficiaries, for the European Commission services as well, the scrutiny that the European Court of Auditors can scrutinize the budgetary authority in charge of the Horizon 2020 actions. There could be an increased error rate as well, of course, an increased ex post audit efforts to detect such errors, and eventual corrective measures that may be applied. So this in a nutshell to speak about the consequences of errors and why we would like to avoid them, of course. Now, quickly, just to give you an idea about how the error rate is calculated, basically, from the audits that we are performing, from the population of paid Horizon 2020 grants, we are taking a sample and we calculate an error rate based on a simple calculation. Basically, we are summing up the negative adjustments from the audit, and we are dividing this by the sum of the audited amounts. The assurance elements of the audit, the main purpose of an audit is to provide assurance. Now, the assurance elements are used to assess the legality and regularity of Horizon 2020 project payments, and to also calculate a so-called residual error rate. Basically, the residual error rate is the, let's say, remaining error not detected within the audit. And the point that the objective is to keep this residual error rate as at an acceptable level. The general control objective of the control strategy is to get the residual error rate as close as possible to 2%, without necessarily expecting it to get under 2%, of course. The main detected errors, so now we are trying to, we'll present to you in the slides the main detected errors during the audits that we carried out for Horizon 2020 actions. Are for personal cost especially, they are due to mainly first of all, incorrect productive hours calculation. Basically, I think we have a slide later on about this, but this is referring basically to the three options to calculate productive hours and to the correct application, especially of the second option and third one, meaning the individual productive hours or the standard productive hours, which have some conditions to respect. So therefore, either the conditions are not entirely respected, or the errors refer especially to these conditions to be respected. The option one, obviously, it could be used, so we have less errors there. Regarding remuneration cost, we may have incorrect remuneration cost, like, for example, estimated cost or budgeted cost, which may indeed explain some of the errors in personnel cost. The other part is incorrect time working on the action claimed obviously this is linked directly with the timesheets. And of course, all the elements explained by David, my colleague David earlier, about the timesheets should obviously be taken into account, because this may lead to errors if this is not the case. And of course, unreliable or missing timesheets, this may lead to rejection of cost or to calculation of adjustments by the auditors. Just to make sure that the personal cost is correct, so how to tackle these errors? For the personal cost calculation, the method to calculate personal cost is to multiply the hours worked coming from the timesheets with the total of personal cost, basically basic salary, social security contributions, and add-ons, to the total productive hours obtained by using the options explained earlier, 1, 2, and 3, basically fixed number of hours, individual productive hours, or standard productive hours. This second part of the equation is called the hourly rate, and basically for the personal cost, or for the upper part, we would advise to make sure that the time recording system, this is for the, first of all, sorry, for the number of hours, some advices from an audit perspective. So we will advise you to make sure that the time recording system is consistent with the human resources records, probably dated and signed, not in excess of your full-time employment, and this has to do, of course, with double sealing, with the respect of double sealing, explained earlier by my colleague, and of course to have sufficient, to have the time recording sufficient in terms of information. And here you have, of course, the necessary information in the annotated grant agreement with the minimum conditions that could be included in the timesheets. For the numerator part now, for the personal cost that you can include to calculate the hourly rate, the eligible personal cost may include, as I was saying earlier as well, the brute salaries, the gross salaries, the social security contributions, the employers and employees contributions. So obviously the employees contribution is included in the gross salary. I will not enter into these details, but both of them are eligible. And taxes and other costs included in the remuneration if they arise from national law or employment contract. So these are the eligibility rules. Now, what they should not include is any ineligible item. There is a specific article, namely 6.5, which details all these ineligible items, majority of them. And any cost included in other budget cost category, obviously like indirect cost or subcontracting or travel cost, etc., should not be included again in personnel costs. So I think this is very obvious. For the denominator, so for the down part of the equation to calculate the hourly rate, the advice, as my colleague said as well, is to really use the option 1,720 hours. This has the less, let's say, has, let's say, the less possibility to make errors. Yeah, it's one fixed amount, you can use it, and the possibility to make errors is lower. Now, if you can use this option, if the employment contract does not specify the working time or conditions, or if the annual workable hours cannot be determined also. So you may have some specificities here. If you have those specificities, you may use also this option in addition. For individual annual productive hours, so this is this option 2 to calculate productive hours, basically the formula should be used, the formula which is well explained in the annotated grant agreement. So to calculate this annual individual productive hours by first calculating the annual workable hours and deducting, of course, absences and adding also overtime. For the standard annual productive hours, these should be, so here we have conditions obviously for option 2 and 3. We don't have all the conditions on the slide, but basically, please, if there are specificities to pay attention to are those conditions where we can use this. For example, individual productive hours cannot be used in certain conditions and in certain circumstances and so on. For standard annual productive hours, this should be, that's one of the conditions, according to the beneficiary's usual cost accounting practices. And of course, the minimum threshold of 90% should be respected, meaning the annual productive hours are at least 90% of the standard annual workable hours. Basically, by taking out the absences and overtime, this will not be more than 10%. Now, some further advices on how to avoid errors. You can make sure that the time charged to the project is correct. Basically, all the hours that you use to calculate the personnel cost are exactly the same as what you have in your timesheets or in the time recording system, if it's an IT one. You may be amazed, we still find many differences in the time charged in audits. Time records, the second advice is that time records that you use meet the grant agreement's conditions. Basically, you have the name of the person working, the signature of the person, signature of the supervisor, etc. The number of hours, obviously, very important, worked on the project. And in the remuneration, the numerator is correct. As explained earlier, you do not include ineligible items. You only include those elements that come from the labor agreement, etc., labor contract. And then for the down part of the calculation, productive hours in the denominator are correct, meaning either you use simply option 1 and then there is nothing else to check further, or if you use option 2 or 3, you will make sure that the conditions to use these options are fulfilled. Furthermore, personnel cost formula reconciles, meaning there are no arithmetical errors still in the formulas. This may happen, this still happens, although with using IT tools, this is less and less the case, but we may still find errors there. And that transaction listing reconciles. Here, given the fact that often beneficiaries are taking extracts, what we call breakdown of cost, extracts of cost from the accounting system or project accounting system to declare this in the financial statements for Horizon 2020, there could be, let's say, some rows that are not taken properly or errors still that may happen there. Employment contracts are in place for employees, obviously. For the other type of personnel, we're not talking here because we are more focusing on personnel costs, but basically for employment contracts, if you are declaring personnel cost as for employees, you should make sure that the employment contracts are in place, of course. Also for the audit, and this you will receive anyway a list of documents to prepare for the audit in advance. And one last part, basically here, exchange rate, to ensure that the exchange rate is stipulated by the Horizon 2020 grant agreement is calculated, because you have to use a specific exchange rate. Of course, before you press the button, you do all these final checks. Now, this is only several hints and advices from an auditor's point of view. Of course, there are many more details that we see but this is to only give you an idea about what are the main elements you can do in order to avoid errors. Some additional info, some of them have already been indicated by my colleague in the previous presentation, but basically we have the Horizon 2020 Indicative Audit Program, where you can go and see what are the main checks, indicative checks that could be done in case of an audit. So there you can also test for your own situations or specific situations, or for the checks that you could do already at your level. Of course, Horizon 2020 online manual, we have a section, a specific section for audit and certifications. Inside, of course, the online manual itself. And the same as in the previous presentation, national contact points or research inquiry service for any other further questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sorin. Please join us here at the coffee table so we can start answering questions. We have received plenty of questions, close to 400 questions so far, and they are ranked now by order of likes, and hopefully they will soon appear in your screen. So let's start with the first one. I think the first one is a more legal aspect. Should we include bonuses? And that's for you, David.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if thank you very much for the question, but for giving it to me. Bonuses is a completely additional issue on which we could spend half an hour of debate. So I'm going to try to spot the key elements that might help you to decide if you can charge bonuses or not. Some people call bonuses also for things that are allowances. For instance, if I am supposed or if I have the right in accordance with the law, the collective labor agreement, I have the right to get X euros or whatever your national currency more because I have kids. Well, this is absolutely eligible. It's not a problem. It's determined. It's fixed. It comes, for instance, in my example from the law, the collective labor agreement. There's no problem. Let's imagine also that the collective labor agreement has, for instance, defined that when you are a team leader, you will get X euros more, or that your salary is increased, or that you have an extra payment or bonuses of X euros. No problem again, it's determined, it's clear, it's settled, and I have the right to it. The thing becomes much more tricky when there are not legal provisions, so basically there's no law or collective labor agreement or even the employment contract has not explicitly fixed these extra payments that I can get. Well, there I want to send you two key messages. The first, you need at least to have, remember that I said there is no, in this case there is no law and applicable, no collective labor agreement defining the bonuses and not in the employment contract. You need at least to have internal rules, clear, explicit, and in writing, electronically, if you want, but something that can be checked by our auditors, defining who will get how much, when, under what conditions. So we need objectivity and certainty about who and in what situations will get how much. If you don't have it, if it is market prices at the market price, at the end of the year to say, well, the business went well, so I'm gonna make my people happy and I will give them 500 euros or 5,000 euros more because business went well, and there is nothing objective, there is nothing in the internal rules, it has not been settled, then we will have to say, sorry, this is not eligible. That type of bonuses we will not accept. And just the final message, if the bonuses are because the person participates in a specific project, for instance, in our Horizon 2020 project, remember what I told you during my presentation. This is the slide with the two little persons. You need to check very carefully in the grant agreement, annotated model grant agreement also, if you will be entitled to declare this cost, because that is a very specific situation. And for bonuses, they stop there for the time being, because as you see, it has a big range of possibilities.
Thank you very much, David. The next question, you have seen it already, and you have mentioned during your presentation, how to calculate person month. Do you want to come over?
Yeah, because actually I think that here you refer to person months in the technical reports. All the explanations that I have made during my presentation were about how to calculate the costs that you can declare to the Horizon 2020 grant agreement. So one thing are the rules to declare the cost. Another thing is what you need to put in the technical reports. So you have financial reports and technical reports. Both are to be submitted at the end of the reporting periods. So when we speak about the financial reports and the eligibility of costs, there we speak about hours in Horizon 2020. Horizon Europe, you will speak about days. By the way, there is another question at the end which seems to mix a bit Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. So Horizon Europe is going to be days, Horizon 2020 is hours. So financial reports are hours. When you are in the technical reports, you are requested to declare the number of person months that have been worked in the action. Actually, this requirement is chiefly addressed to verify, sorry, apparently there's a problem with my micro. To verify, now it's changed. Thank you very much, my mistake. to verify if, luckily I have a strong voice, so my colleagues were getting my voice through their micros. So any possible deviations between what you have actually done and what you have foreseen at the beginning, so during the budget in your Annex 1. So if you foreseen to work 10 person months in work package X during the first reporting period, and at the end you needed 20, you will probably ask it, why this difference? There's nothing wrong, I insist, declare always the reality. But you are gonna probably be asked, well, why this difference? What was the problem? And if necessary, also an amendment might have to be done, or further explanations, etc., etc. So the key message is not that relevant how you convert the hours into months. So the hours that you declare in the financial statements into the months that you declare in the reporting, in the technical reports. You may do it if you have a usual practice in accordance to your practice. For instance, if you normally consider that a working month is 145 hours, for instance, you can convert using that rule. If you have no rule at all, you may perfectly take the annual productive hours that you use to calculate the hourly rates and divide by 12, and 1/12 of the annual is going to be the month, and you can convert it through that. So, for instance, under option 1, 1720, you divide by 12, it gives you 143.33, and you can use that to convert the hours that you declared for the personnel cost in the financial statements into the person months for your technical reports. But don't be particularly worried about that. So if it's going to be a bit more, a bit less there, that's not a problem. The technical reports have to verify that the implementation of the action, so that the project is going as expected, and if not, to ask you what is the reason why it's not going as expected.
Thank you very much, David. The next question is from Francesco. Thank you, Francesco, for putting your name. What documents can be considered as valid and accepted proof of payment for the salaries?
Your micro. I think that that's for Sorin.
I think I can go ahead with this one. So in practice, what we see on the spot is that for salaries payment, we have more and more, of course, electronic bank transfers that we can see in the extract of the bank, in fact. And either we can see a bigger amount, which is then divided, of course, based on the payroll extracts on each salary. So this is the main type of proof that we see. Of course, we can still have checks payment. We can still, we see less and less cash payments, but obviously electronic banking transfers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sorin. And there is another question there from R. Vermeer about the timesheets, actually. Can they be supplied digitally? And that's a common problem we have now with COVID, that we are teleworking many times. Or must an original timesheet always be present in the administration? How is that working?
So I can start, and maybe my colleague can intervene later on. So if the timesheets, we can have two situations. If we have an electronic time recording system, then this is a different situation, because we have some conditions to respect according to the annotated grant agreement, meaning that there is a trace and there are some logbooks and so on. For the time records that are normally done on paper or an Excel format and then printed and signed manually, especially during the COVID situation, I think it is acceptable, and this has been explained in the legal FAQs published in the participant portal, that this can be accepted during this temporary period, but once the situation goes back to normal, that you will have to also still sign the paper and to have all the signatures and the documents properly signed also in paper. But during the temporary situation, to accept also temporarily to have these documents scanned, sent by email, for example, to the supervisors that will accept them also in return of an email. If David, if you would like to. maybe.
No, sorry, I think that you cover all the aspects. Perhaps just to say, indeed, that some people think that because I type in Excel the number of hours and I do nothing else, I have electronic timesheets. That's not correct, as Soren explained it. We need something that links, for instance, a username and a password that ensures that the people who actually encoded the data is the person concerned, and that a supervisor countersigned that information. And for the part about the COVID situation, indeed, if you want more information on that, in your web browser, you type Horizon 2020 COVID FAQs, and you frequently ask questions, and you will get to a page in the portal where you have specific explanations dedicated to COVID, including solutions that can be accepted for the period in which it was not possible to go to the office, or hopefully it does not happen again, but if it happens again, it's already explained in one of the FAQs.
Thank you both. Next question is, should we declare a subcontractor self-employed and working exclusively for us? If yes, how to do that? And if he joins during the project, do we need to do something?
If he or she joins during the project, you need to do something. Yeah, well, I'm gonna try to address this question and the next question together, because in fact, for me, they chiefly relate to this last indent on my second slide about the consultants. So when the person is an employee, it's clear, there is no debate there. I think it's obvious, it's within the personal cost. Differently, if the person has a direct contract with me, the beneficiary, that is not an employment contract, then I might still declare the person as my personal cost under some conditions. I did not enter into the conditions because it takes some time, but I want to address the first and probably the most important. The way in which, or the conditions under which the person works for the beneficiary, for you, must be similar to those of an employee. So if you want to declare this person as personal cost, even if the person does not have an employment contract, but another type of direct contract between you and the individual person, you may still declare them as personal cost, but one of the key conditions is the working relation must be similar to that of an employee. And this refers to how the work is organized, so that there is someone really who instructs this consultant in a way similar to an employee, about working time requirements, about presence requirements. It does not have to be necessarily exactly the same that an employee, otherwise you will probably have a problem regarding that contract, but they must be similar. And the cost must be also similar to that of an employee. So if you have consultants, so let's put it differently. If you have persons that you intend to declare to the action, so you intend to charge their cost to the action, that are not employees, go to the annotated grant agreement, section 6, article 6282, and verify what are the conditions under which you could declare these people as your personal cost. If they do not fulfill any of those conditions, it does not imply that the costs are not eligible, but as you, in the question is already remarked, you might be obliged to declare them as purchase of services in the best scenario, or as subcontracting in the worst scenario. And I mean the worst scenario just because under subcontracting, you need to anticipate this in the grant agreement or include the subcontract as in Annex 1 by an amendment. So it's heavier process than if you can declare the people as purchase of services. To give you an example, if you work with interim work agencies or temporary work agencies, this typically, not necessarily in every single case, but it's typically the situation in which this is purchase of services and not subcontracting. So you really need to see these people that I have working for me but are not my employees and for whom I want to charge their cost to the action, under which category they fit. And for me, it covers both questions. Also the second with Esper with B2B.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Is there a template for personal cost calculation?
Well, I want to tell you the legal part, and perhaps, Manuel, you want to say something about the reporting. I don't know. For the legal part, it's already included in your grant agreement. So I know how long the grant agreement is. And the reporting, if I remember correctly, is Annex 4. So you have to go through all the legal provisions, the 50-something articles, the full Annex 1, the Annex 3, and the Annex 2A, and then you will reach the template of the financial reports, where you also see the personnel costs. Now, not all the information is there, of course, because that's a summary, but you will see it detailed at the time of reporting. And as I was explaining in the slide about the wizard, you may perfectly use this IT tool in which you will already be guided through every step for the personal cost declaration, so you don't forget anything. Of course, if you encode the data erroneously, if the salary of the person is 10,000 euros per year and you encode 15,000 or 5,000, eventually the results are going to be wrong. But if you encode the data correctly, following the instructions in the wizard, the calculations are going to be okay, and normally all the verifications are done automatically. So that's a bit to encourage you also to use the wizard, particularly if you are not familiar with Horizon 2020 grants.
Perfect, thank you very much. Do we have to officially track every hour worked on the project? What about work that can be considered as both work for the project and normal work?
Shall I?
I can try first and then you can complement, David. Thank you. So officially track every hour. What is expected from the timesheets is to declare, to put in the timesheets monthly how many hours have been declared, indeed, have been worked, sorry, for the action, for the Horizon 2020 action. This is the main element that will help for the calculation of the personal cost for the Horizon 2020 action. Basically, from all the personal costs that you have within the entity, the company, the public institution, so on, you may be able to see what are the costs through this calculation, through this number of hours, what are the costs to be calculated on the Horizon 2020 action. So yes, I would say yes, you need to. Now, if you have hours spent both for a project task and normal work task, here you really have to pay attention what exactly you understand by normal work task. If this task, whether it is normal, it's done normally by one technician, for example, to work on a machine. Normally it is done there, but this time it will be done for a specific project, and you may link it to the project. Then it's either work for the project, either work, I would say, for the normal task of that person, but it cannot be both. So as auditors, if we see like multi-projects hours, we will have difficulty to consider them as being directly linked to Horizon 2020 action. I hope this is clear. Maybe David, you would like to. It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you both. How to convert a person month in hours?
You don't do that. You are doing it the wrong way. You keep the timesheets with the hours, and eventually, as I say, because that's what you need to judge cost to the action, the number of hours in the timesheets. I insist there is a possibility to a declaration for persons working exclusively in the action that I didn't tackle. It exists. You can check it in the annotated grant agreement also, where a link is also to the declaration. But in most cases, you are within the need to have timesheets. And then you convert the number of hours in the timesheets into months, person months, for the technical reports, not the other way around. Remember, the obligation is to have the supporting documents, in this case, typically timesheets, for the number of hours working in the action. So I don't see a case in which you will start from person months and convert into hours. You will do the other way around. Start from the hours into the timesheets, and for the technical reports, convert into months.
So here in the next question, they do it correctly. We keep detailed timesheet hours per day, where the total productive hours is at the end of the year higher than 1720. Can we still use the simple 1720 productive hours per year for declarations?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. When you say the daily timesheets, I presume that you have full-time timesheets, so recording all the hours. Do you understand the same? Sorry, that's all the hours, not just the hours for Horizon 2020, but all your other tasks, and that actually the person works more than 17, 20 hours. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. In fact, I always remember at the very beginning of Horizon 2020, when we were young and wild, and we were doing these presentations for the starting of the program, and somebody asked me, well, does it mean that if the person reaches 17, 20 hours in November, I send the person home? But no, the person can, of course, continue working, particularly if it is part of the contractual requirements. If I'm supposed to work in accordance to my national law, my contract, 1,800 hours, of course you keep on working. The rule simply is that you can never charge to us, to EU grants, more than 1720. At that moment, the person does not have to start working, to stop working. Can even still work in our grants, but they cannot charge to us more than 1720 if the option for the annual productive hours is 1720. Because at that moment, the full salary is already charged to EU grants. An hour more would imply profit, which is not possible.
Thank you. The next question has already been answered. Can we keep timesheets digitally? Do you want to come over this one, or is just a simple yes and that's it?
I think again maybe we can just remind the legal FAQ on the right on Google Horizon 2020 legal FAQ and COVID legal FAQ, and then you may find immediately the replies in the frequently asked questions.
Yes, and I think indeed, as Sorin said, that it's important that you know there are a set of FAQs, frequently asked questions related to COVID. And one is this about the timesheets, but there are many other aspects, and if you are not at all aware of them, and if you were already implementing Horizon 2020 grants, particularly at the start of the pandemic, where all the normal working methods were extremely disturbed, it's good that you have a look on these FAQs. And I insist, web browser, if you don't want to spend time looking for where it is in the portal, web browser, Horizon 2020 COVID FAQs, and you will reach them very easily.
Thank you both. Can we move budget within the other direct costs? For instance, travel budget, travel money goes to other goods and services.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a good question to tackle in general. What are the budget transfers? Actually, you have a lot of flexibility in Horizon 2020 to move budgets from one category to the other. So even this change in budget is not limited to within other direct costs. You may also need to move from other direct costs into personal costs, for instance, because you need more work, and now we expected to travel a lot for whatever reason, for meetings or whatever, and now we don't travel anymore because we work conferencing or whatever, and on the other side you need more working time into the project. So it's possible indeed. There are some restrictions which in reality imply that for some cases of transfer of budget, you may need to ask for an amendment. Remember when we were speaking about subcontracting, for instance, and I told you, if you go into subcontracting, it must be in Annex 1. And if it is not in Annex 1, you must do an amendment. So that means, for instance, that you might need to move personal costs, because at the beginning you thought that it would be your people, your staff doing this part of this specific task of the action, and eventually you realize that it's no longer possible, the person left, or whatever circumstances, you need to externalize it to a subcontract, then it's still possible, but you need an amendment. And the commission, the agency, the granting authority will need to agree on this amendment. It also happens that you need amendments for budget transfers if you are moving tasks. So if I am supposed to do something, and it's very similar also to the case of contracting, if I'm supposed to be doing something, some task of the action as beneficiary, and eventually I agree with Sorin, who is also beneficiary in the grant, look, you better do it because now you have the right people and I don't have it anymore. You are moving a task to someone else. That implies a modification of Annex 1, of description of the action, and then you need to do an amendment. It's not that it's not possible, it's that you need to do an amendment. For the rest, most of the switches between budgets, you don't need an amendment, but so you can do them rather freely. In any case, the advice is, well, if you are moving substantial money from one budget category to another, or from one beneficiary to another, it's always good that you consult this with the project officer, the EU project officer in charge of the grant. Sending an email and getting an agreement or an acknowledgement from the side of the project officer. Today, costs nothing, it's a normal procedure, and you will be much more secure on this budget transfer.
The next question is about the contract of natural person states the duration and the number of hours to be worked. Do I have to calculate the double ceiling rule?
Maybe I can
You, sorry?
try this one.
Thank you.
Leave it with David. It is, for the, the natural persons, okay, there is a contract. Here I will pay attention first to see in which category of cost the natural persons can be declared. So to go through the 6282 article and annotations, of course. I think there is a small error, probably it's 12 persons month or 1 person month for the project. I'm not sure I understand well the question. I assume it's 12 person months because this is 1 year, so 1 year is the hours to be worked for the company is 12 person months. Do I have to calculate the double ceiling? So we have a contract for a consultant, let's call it consultant for now, which will, let's say, fulfill the conditions to declare this as personal cost. Let's assume this. Now, if this consultant work 12 person months, so the full time during April to March for the company, what the entity will have to do next is to have timesheets, of course, of how many hours the person worked for the Horizon 2020 action. And based on this, the hourly rate calculated for this person will be the total personal cost, obviously, divided by the option used for the productive hours and multiplied by this number of hours worked for the action. The double ceiling rule is to be checked, I would say, all the time. There is no exception not to check the double ceiling rule because from an auditor's perspective at least, it's always good what's the purpose of the double ceiling is to ensure that you didn't declare same cost twice, basically. So this is checked through the number of hours and through the cost, the total cost that are declared. First of all, to the number of hours, if the person, for example, declares on the project 1,800 hours, but uses to calculate the productive hours based on 1,600 hours, obviously there are 200 hours declared more. The point of the double ceiling is to limit the number of hours to the maximum 1,600. Like that, the cost declared to the project will not be more than 100%. And the other way around for the second indent of this double ceiling is that if in the project accounting, the total personal cost of one person is, let's say, 50, and the personal cost, because the person worked exclusively for the action, but or also because the person worked, let's say, on the action, the total cost declared on the action will be more than the cost booked in the accounts. Then it's like then these costs are ineligible because they are not actual cost booked as such in the account, so they are not real cost, in fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, David? Or?
Perhaps to note, well, this relates to the explanations about consultants, and, because it maybe not necessarily, or in all cases, employees. So perhaps making a note there that if we are speaking about these consultants, so people who has a contract that is not an employment contract, the calculation of the hourly rate is slightly different. It's described in the annotated model grant agreement, and by the application of the correct calculation as described in the annotated grant agreement, the double ceiling is respected. So always check, and for me the first step is always to check, well, where do I have to put these costs? Are these personal costs? Are these subcontracting? Are these purchase of services? And then you analyze under which of these ones, what rules and what explanations apply to the specific costs.
Thank you very much. The next question is a person who's working 12 person months in a project of 24 months, that is half time. However, some of these months have 184 productive hours, others 144. How to proceed in this case?
It's not a problem. It's not a problem in itself. It's not permanent safe. Remember what also Soren re-explained about the double ceiling. We have something to be verified at the end of the financial year that the person cannot declare more than, I insist that we use 1720 because it's the recommended option, the option one, the simplest. In reality, straight to census, you cannot go over the number of annual productive hours that you use to calculate the hourly rate. So keeping on the basis of 1720, you will have to verify that you don't go over this 1720 if you use option one. But this is over the financial year and taking into account if the person is full-time or part-time, so the potential pro rata, if the person is employed for the full year or for part of the year. There is no this verification per month, so you don't have to respect 143 in each month. In some months you will work more or may work more, in some months you will or may work less. That's not a problem. The verification is for the full financial year. Now, just one remark, it's not a problem for as far as what you declare is compatible with your national law and the employment contract. If in accordance with my national law, I cannot work more than, I don't know, 170 hours in a month, and you come and declare 184, there is a problem, you see? But it's not because of our rules, it's because you will be against your own rules, against the national provisions, the national law, or the provisions in the employment contract, you see? For us, the verification is done per financial year, not per month.
Thank you. If not working fully for the action, working hours need to be reported. How do these hours relate to person month? Real months have different number of working hours.
I think this is what we explained several times. The way in which you convert the number of hours into person months for the technical reports is the initial reply is do it as you normally do, in accordance with your usual practices. You probably or possibly don't have usual practice, then you can perfectly do it by 1/12 of the annual productive hours.
Thank you. The next question, a staff member works on the project and does not receive any remuneration for his time spent on the project. Do we still declare his time through reporting?
You don't declare the time for the financial reports because there is no money involved. You should declare it in the technical reports because otherwise you will probably be asked about the deviation. If I budgeted 10 person months and eventually 3 of these 10 person months are done by someone that I don't charge the action, and in the technical reports I say, yes, okay, 7 because the other 3 are for free, you might be asked, well, what happens, why this difference? So better to anticipate and already in the technical reports explain that, okay, yeah, we work at 10 person months, 3 were for this person or this researcher that actually we didn't charge costs because works for free or we don't want to charge it. But on the side of the technical reports, better is already to anticipate and explain the situation.
Thank you. The next question is from Milena Kristeva. Are we going to receive templates for the financial reporting? I think we already mentioned that.
Yeah, and there goes more into there you really can see already the details in the grant agreement. The annex of the grant agreement is already, one of the annexes is already a template of the financial reporting. I must say that when you go live in the reporting tool of the commission or of the agency through the portal, I mean, it doesn't look quite the same than what you see in the legal part of the grant agreement. So in the legal template, but the fields are the same. I just simply position it differently. So if you go into your grant agreement and you look there, the financial reporting is already there anticipated. You see how it is.
And the next one is, should I deduct maternity leave from the annual hours using the 1720 method?
One is sorry.
Go ahead. It's
See, yeah.
Yes.
You may, under the 3 methods, you may deduct time about parental leave, maternity leave, parental leave. Look, this is something important that I didn't tackle in detail. When you use 1720 hours, it's 1720 hours. Let's imagine that you have a person employed full-time from January to December. So it's 1720, there's no pro rata, and you cannot deduct any absences except parental leave, maternity leave. This is an exception that comes in the grant agreement. So it's really something that the legal provisions, the grant agreement that you sign explicitly says you are entitled to remove this. Okay? nothing else. So if the person is sick for 6 months, sorry, it's still 1720 if you use option 1. Okay, perhaps a remark there. The 3 options must be used consistently. So it might be a situation in which I have a category of staff using option 1 and another category of staff using option 2. I mean, imagine I have, I don't know, permanent staff using 1720 and temporary staff using individual annual productive hours. It's possible, but you must use these combinations consistently. What you cannot do is, in my example, I use for all permanent staff 1720, but I have one person who is unfortunately recurrently sick, and for this one I will move it, just this person into the individual. That's not possible. The options must be used consistently. In principle, we expect for simplification reasons that you apply one option for all your staff participating in Horizon 2020. You may do it different options per different cost categories, staff categories, but it must be consistently. You cannot do cherry picking, and for one in the same category this option, and for another a different one. Fine for you, sorry.
I will just add here that we should always also keep in mind that if there are some reimbursements or some from the Social Security that should be taken into account in the numerator in the total personal cost, we should always be coherent, of course, in the calculation of the hourly rate. So yes, to be deducted, but also please align as well with the upper part of the equation.
Yeah, thank you. Very good point. Yeah.
Thank you both. If during the project we deplete the expected budget for personnel costs, do we still declare actual cost in the next periodic report? Do we need an amendment for that? You too?
Go ahead for the first part.
Go ahead.
So actual cost, please. Actual cost. What you should declare in the financial statement is actual cost. Budgeted or estimated cost are one of those categories of costs that are not eligible. There could be certain conditions under which budgeted cost, okay, for average personal cost, so there could be specificities, but in general, and even there, they are the actual cost registered in the accounts for average personal cost, but in general, you should declare the real cost, the actual cost that you declare, that you book in the accounts, in the project accounting of the project, the accounts of the project, or in your general accounts, but they should be always actual. For the second part, maybe David would like to intervene.
Yeah, and in fact, because I think that we can cover this question and the next one together. Actually, is what Sorin said. At the time of declaring, you declare your actual cost. You did a proposal. You made a budget. We are speaking about research. We don't know. You do an estimation of it might need 10 person months, which implies so many euros. But when you start working in any field, but particularly in research, you actually do not know how much is going to be the time needed and even the cost at the end. So one thing is what you put in the budget, and which is what we use to fix the EU grant. Because in your EU grant, in your grant agreement Horizon 2020, there is a specific article which says the maximum EU contribution is going to be so much. Let's imagine 2 million euros. This is for the whole consortium. This is set on stone. We will not change it. I mean, it very rarely happens, and it's very extraordinary circumstance that could lead to a change in this maximum grant amount. So this maximum grant amount is based on the budget. Then you start implementing the project. You start finding the problems or the difficulties, addressing the challenges of the action, preparing deliverables. At that moment, when you reach the financial reporting and the technical reporting, but the financial reporting time, you declare the reality. It doesn't matter if the reality is higher or is lower than what it was in your budget. You declare your reality. Then several things, including obviously for the personal cost, the reality of the number of hours, the reality of the related costs. Then it may happen different situations. Imagine in our 2 million euros grant. Imagine that the grant agreement is the 3 of us, because we need three beneficiaries at least. Imagine that I overspend. So I spend more in personal costs, for instance, than what I had in the budget, but that they underspend. They spend less than what was in the budget. So for whatever reason, their budget was too much to what they eventually needed. What is going to happen is that the granting authority, let's put one executive agency, will pay up to these 2 million euros, depending on the total the total eligible cost declared. So it might perfectly happen that even if my part of the budget I have overspent, because they underspent, I might even receive more money, more EU contribution than what was initially in the budget. Because as they spent less, there were more money available that I needed for my part of the work. Okay, so in all cases declare the reality. If on the other scenario, imagine the 3 of us overspend, there's just going to be 2 million, and we will have to get to an agreement, which normally should be settled in advance in the consortium agreement about, well, as we overspend, the 3 of us or 1 of us, and we went over the 2 million, and we just get 2 million, how we will reallocate the EU funding that we received. So I went a step further just to cover the 2 questions. The key message is, of course, you keep on declaring and you declare the reality of the cost, not the budget, whatever you recur it in reality.
In any case, since we work for the European Commission, we cannot apply for.
That's absolutely.
So the next question is from AS. Is every project audited? And that's probably for you, Sorin. How long do we need to keep evidence, timesheets, records, invoices, whatever?
So the projects are audited based on on a sample. So we do have a statistical sample behind, and it could be. But every project to be audited, to my understanding, no. That there is a sampling behind, and that will indicate when an audit will happen, and the beneficiary is informed accordingly. For the second part, as I don't have the annotated agreement in front of me, I may be helped probably by David. But to my understanding, the evidence should be kept up to 5 years, if I remember well, after the end of the project.
And you have two. Typically, it's 5 years. Perhaps they might be more interesting to know that normally we just can audit 2 years. So even if we can audit just for 2 years, you need to keep the documents up to 5 years, because these are the audits of the Commission, but you might also receive later checks via the Court of Auditors, who they are actually auditing us, but through you. Or in the worst scenario, hope you never find yourself in that situation, by investigations by OLAF, the anti-fraud office. So there is an obligation, typically, and not to complicate things, for 5 years.
Thank you both. The next question is, do direct personnel costs declared as SME owners without a salary exposed on the Form C have to be devolved to the same SME owners involved into the action?
I understand that the question is if the SME owner unit cost, so the money, the EU contribution that is generated, paid because of the time worked by the SME owner, has to be actually paid to that SME owner. If that's the question, the answer is no. So we calculate this contribution based on the time worked by the SME owner that is not an employee of the SME, and then we pay this amount because the beneficiary is entitled to it based on the rules of the grant agreement, but there's no need or no obligation, so to say, that this amount is actually then paid to the SME owner.
Thank you. The next one, I think we have already answered. We use a digital system for our writing, and ours are closed and approved on a monthly basis. Do we still need to print the monthly timesheet and sign the hard copy? Do you want to come?
Legal FAQ, COVID, yeah, and then there are some FAQ on this.
Okay. Next question, please. Sorry, it has changed. Will you provide a standard timesheet template? And that's a question that is recurring.
But we did better than that. Actually, there is, through the annotated model grant agreement, a hyperlink to a model of minimum requirements, a timesheet with the minimum requirements. So it's not an obligation to use it. In many cases, at least in a good number of cases, beneficiaries already have their own time recording system and their own timesheets, so they don't need to change. They normally can keep using their own timesheets. But for those of you who do not have it, and they just want to do it, they just have to do it because of their participation in the Horizon 2020 grant agreement, in the annotated model grant agreement that we spoke several times, under Article 18, if I remember right, there is a hyperlink to a template, insist not mandatory, but available, of a timesheet with the minimum requirements. And you can perfectly use it if you don't have any other timesheets as usual practice, and you don't want to invent or risk inventing something that is not in accordance with the minimum provision, the minimum requirements. You can use this template.
Thank you. And this one is about indirect costs. Please give examples of indirect cost. How do we know if a cost is eligible for indirect cost? For example, if we buy a laptop. Is it okay?
I start and I pass you the floor. Just because remember that in direct costs, we have a flat rate. So the question in reality is the contrary. It's how do you know what you can charge as a direct cost? Because whatever you cannot charge as a direct cost, you may say that is covered by the indirect cost flat rate. Sorry, you want to try for the direct one?
We'll complement with the direct one. For example, the example of the laptop. So here it depends, I would say, on your cost accounting practices also, but also on your possibility to directly link the use of a laptop, for example, only to a research project. This is very rare that we see laptops declared. I mean, it could be the case, but for a laptop to be declared on a research project, this could be the case, but if it's used probably exclusively for the project, foreseen also in the budget, and there is a proof as well that it was exclusively used for the project. That could be a case, for example, or if it's not used exclusively, then we can go to use let's say proofs for use on each project. But in general, what we see is that really laptops and PCs and are not cost directly declared. They are cost, and I would really advise you to consider them as being cost, indirect cost, and not direct cost. Direct costs typically are costs that you will buy for the project directly. You know that you can also anticipate many of them. So basically you have personnel costs, subcontracting costs, but then in the other direct cost, the travel cost, okay, it's very clear. For the other direct costs, basically it's everything in addition that you needed, like consumables that you needed to buy, especially for the project, to do some tests on the machine. And you can clearly directly link this to the action. That could be other direct cost. But for all the rest, 25%, you don't need to prove on what you spent 25%. It's rather the other way around. You need to prove the direct link of direct cost declared on the project.
Perfect, thank you both. Is there a maximum and minimum payment limit for salaries for someone involved in the project?
Well, I would like to start by the exception. If you are in Maria's Law's Kakuri actions, there the amount that is for the benefit of the person, of the fellow who participate in the action is already fixed. But this is just the exception. Otherwise, no, there is no, per se, there is no minimum or maximum salary for a person involved in the project. For the minimum, typically you have national regulations fixing the minimum salary. I know it's not the case in every single member state, but in most of them. For the maximum, we expect that the persons who participate in our action and are charged to the action are remunerated with the same standards that the rest of the employees of the beneficiary. So remember that in this slide with the two persons, the first comment was, I want to pay more because the person participates in the Horizon 2020 action, in an EU action, and that already is probably a problem, you see? So we expect that is paid at the same level that the other employees or similar employees in the beneficiary, so the people that you employ. It may be always a small debate if now you decide that you have to hire Messi to do a research, probably based on the provision that says that cost must be necessary, not reckless, and that we need to keep, how can I say, to keep the cost within this reasonability framework, that we will probably have a problem. But the rule of thumb is we will see what you normally do with your remuneration to other employees to see if what you paid the person who participates in our action is equivalent, comparable, and so can be accepted.
Thank you. The next one, is it admissible that an SME owner without salary declares he works 17, 20 hours a year on EU projects, and there are 24, 70 hours a year, and as he carries out also acts for his SME, works for his SME?
I can start
Yeah.
with the audit perspective. So, from an auditor's perspective, if we are on the spot and we see that one of the SME owners worked 1,720 hours for the action, and then they declared 1,720 hours for the action, and they have, let's say, worked overall 2,472 hours. As auditors, we will start having questions and doubts. I mean, first of all, the 1,720 hours is the maximum to be declared as a full-time equivalent. Of course, if you worked more, then yeah, it's very difficult to say that we worked. I mean, the auditors most probably will like to understand whether the person, the SME owner, really worked exclusively on the action and so on, because we know that behind, giving the entity, let's say, what type of entity it is, if it's has more employees or not, there is also a need of an administrative work to be done and so on, which of course you may say that is the difference until 2,400. But here I wouldn't advise that. I would really advise to declare the real number of hours worked, as simple as that. If this is 1,720, yeah, maybe David can come in with the legal perspective, but I will advise you to really pay attention. If this is the case, then you may have many questions from the auditors.
Yeah, for me, it's really the audit dimension of it, but I must say, would you believe it? I have seen cases with the audits and audit adjustments of SME owners who presumably never took holidays, never got sick, worked the 17-20 on our project, and apparently a similar amount of hours in other two projects. My question for you is, would you believe it? So our auditors normally may be skeptical about such situations and scratch over the surface to see, well, is this really possible? Is this really feasible? Is this really reasonable? So there is no rule, yes, no. But I think that you would do good to the project if you follow certain advice.
Thank you both. Given the COVID situation, is it possible to declare as natural persons working under a direct contract, persons that are working remotely and even live abroad?
I don't think that it relates just even simply to the COVID situation, frankly. It goes again to this consultancy, and that's why we also insist, because it's a kind of risky category. So remember what I told you a bit before, that for a consultant to be eligible under personal cost, she or he must work under conditions similar to those of an employee. So now if you say, well, you know, we have consultants who live abroad, never come here, and all the work is teleworking, they work remotely. I will probably ask you, well, and your employees, what do they do? I don't know, my employees have to be here in the same country, they cannot go abroad, they cannot telework from wherever they are, or they cannot go on holidays and telework from the place of holidays, they must be here. We will have a problem, because there you see that the conditions would not be at all comparable. Also, there is a tricky issue about the persons that work and live abroad, and it's about the reliability of the timesheets. If they never, if they go work totally autonomously, I would say, from another place without any physical presence, how can we ensure that the supervisor who countersigns the timesheets, how can she or he be sure that those hours are really true? So I don't want to say that it's not possible, because there are mostly theoretical situations in which it could be acceptable, but I frankly would encourage you in a situation like that to see if it would not be more appropriate to declare this as subcontracting if the person is working on a specific task of the action.
Thank you. Next question is, in our projects, we always report person month, but we see that lately documents refer to person days or person hours. How do we make this conversion?
I don't really know. For the person days, I wonder, as I said at the beginning, if it could be Horizon Europe, because there we move from hours into days. But I frankly don't see, I can only insist on what I said before, that financial reports, Horizon 2020 are hours, Horizon Europe are days, and technical reports are months. And for the conversion, we say, yeah, sorry, please.
Maybe I can quickly come in as well. What we see in practice during audits, especially in industry entities, or they are used to calculate this person months. We do see this. What I would advise is that if you start working on an Horizon 2020 project, to put in place timesheets, and you will have number of hours for those persons that work on the. If you have a time recording system, an electronic time recording system in place, most probably this person months would be calculated based on this number of hours also that you calculate. I usually time recording system will always go to the number of hours, and will not really only calculate the number of full-time equivalent, what we call in the profession, so FTE, which is equivalent to 1 person month or 12 person months. So yeah, if you don't have this level of detail of granularity, and you will start working Horizon 2020, which is very not likely. But if this is the case, the best practice would be to really put in place timesheets.
Thank you. And the next question is, can you explain the rule applied in case of double funding? The other project is a national grant.
The double funding applies to EU grants. We don't take into account national grants. That's very simple. So, but also perhaps Sonic wants to say something on this later on. Of course, if we see 17-20 hours charged in EU grants, and incidentally, we also discover that the person is charging a large amount of hours or a percentage of time in national grants, this may put at stake the reliability of the timesheets, which is a big risk. Thing that the moment that we cannot believe anymore in the timesheets because we find evidence that they are wrong, is extremely tricky. Perhaps you want to say something about the unreliable?
I mean, yes. So indeed, for double sealing, the legal requirement is to calculate this for the EU projects. Basically, to check that the number of hours worked on EU projects are not bigger than the number of productive hours used for the calculation of the hourly rate and the personal cost, and that then the amount of personal cost claimed on the EU actions is not bigger than the amount which is booked in the accounts. So this only refers to EU actions, yes. But as David said as well, if one auditor on the spot sees that the person was also involved in other projects, he will have now doubts about the reliability of the time recording system for the EU action also. So I would really pay attention, and once there are doubts about the reliability, then there are, several procedural aspects that you may see as well in the indicative audit program. But we go the other way around. We go to ask for alternative evidence and to quantify how many hours we can take into account. So I will really pay attention to really force the double sealing, and I would take into account. As an auditor, I would advise you to also take into account the national grant. It is not a legal requirement, but I would strongly advise you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you both. We are entering now in the last 15 minutes of our webinar, and we have a question from GLA. Is it correct to use 0.8 per 17-20 hours to indicate total productive hours of part-time people in case they have a contract of 4 days instead of 5?
Yes, it is.
Very easy, thank you very much. How to
Very good question, huh? Also very clear and to the point question, easy to answer.
how to calculate hourly rate when a person switch from annual calculation to monthly calculation because of salary increase from January 2022?
I'm glad for the question because it allows me to clarify it's not person by person. It's all the team together, like friends. If you move people from annual to monthly, you move everyone. In the one only option for one entity in one financial year. So if now you say, well, because I have this person who has been a very high salary increase and the reporting period ends in November, and I think I can scratch a few euros more if I move into the monthly calculations, okay, but then you have to do it for all your staff in all your Horizon 2020 grants during the whole financial year. Next financial year, you can change again if you want. So you cannot move one person. You move the whole package during the full financial year in all your Horizon 2020 grants.
Thank you. The next one is, an SME has only natural persons working under a direct contract. How can costs be compared to employees? What if the company had employees in the previous year?
Any audit feeling about that? No?
I can start with the audit feeling. If the company had employees in the previous year, obviously there is a reference, so the question I think is replied. If there is no reference of other employees in the previous year, then indeed it's a bit complex also from an audit perspective to see how we can check that this condition, which is in the Article 6282, meaning that the costs are similar to personnel, other persons doing the similar task. I think this is exactly, I don't have it in front, it would have been much more precise, but basically this is the requirement behind. For the auditor is a challenge, would be indeed a challenge as well to see how do you estimate that the cost of the natural persons are reasonable. And here I think, I mean, you may have several situations. If you have contracts that you run with those persons for several years already, where you see that the hours are rather stable or reasonable and so on, this may be an argument. And you may find also some other arguments, for example, in the market to see that basically normally the cost of an engineer for this kind of is around this, and you have some. So this is what I can give as let's say suggestions. What else, or let's say as what an auditor could check as such. But David most probably will complement.
I think it's very complete what you say. Sorry, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you both. The next question is from Rainer Sonnenberger. When taking 17-20 hours for productive hours, how to reduce the 17-20 due to part-time work or due to short-time work? What if the regular work is only 7.7 hours a day?
I think that for the part-time work, Sorin already said yes before for the 80% part-time work. With the short-time work, assuming that it means that the person does not work for the full year, it's again a percentage of 17-20. So if the person worked for 6 months for the beneficiary, well, there's going to be 50% of the 17-20. And what if regular work is 7.7 hours a day? We basically, it's not really relevant if you use 17-20. If you think, and I have seen other questions appearing at the bottom, that, well, you know, actually my people works just 1,560 hours per year, so if I use these 1,600 hours per year, my hourly rate is going to be higher, and I don't want the 17-20 even if it's simple, because I prefer to calculate with this actual number of productive hours, which is higher. You have the other two options that I referred to during the presentation, so the individual annual productive hours or the standard annual productive hours. You may go and choose one of these other two options. I insist there is no discussion there. If your number of annual productive hours in the year is lower than 17-20, by using one of the other options, you most likely will get a bit more of your funding because the hourly rate is going to be slightly higher. On the other side, it implies more administrative work and to a certain extent, more risk of error. So it's a choice to be made.
Thank you. The next question. If we have people working exclusively for an EU project, can we use the exclusivity of work document and report the full monthly cost of the employee?
Sorry, if you don't mind, I'm going to explain the legal part, and you speak a bit about the reality of what you find. Report the full monthly cost? No. The declaration on exclusive work, which, as I say, exists, and the link is just very close to the link to the template, the model of the timesheets, is used to justify the number of hours worked in a month. So it's going to be, if you have a declaration covering 6 months, well, it's going to be the corresponding number of hours for 6 months that is going to be considered as worked and supported by documents. But then the calculation about the cost follows exactly the same procedure that what I explained before, including the use of the last closed financial year if you are in annual calculations. So there is not this thing immediately because I have the declaration every month I take the salary and put it into the grind. That's wrong. Because you have the declaration, well, if you use 1720, you are going to have justified 143.33 hours, if I remember correctly, for every month covered by the declaration. And then you will calculate the eligible cost as for any other employee not having the exclusive dedication. But I would really like that Sorin explains a bit what they find normally with these declarations during audits.
So indeed, just to emphasize again, and thank you for explaining it very clearly, David, the declarations of exclusive work replaces, in terms of proof of documentation, the timesheets. That's it. Then for the calculation of the hourly rate, the grant agreement explicitly requires still a calculation of the personnel cost. I think the reasons are mainly that you still have to check ineligible items, you still have to ensure that overall we will need to also check again the double ceiling, and you need to have a calculation by also using productive hours and so on. So what we see in practice, for example, is that if there is no calculation, there may be a risk of error. So I would really advise to really go through the whole calculation. It shouldn't take much time because, okay, for each person, there shouldn't be so many persons working exclusively, or even if they are, by going through the calculation and paying attention to all the steps of the calculation, you will eventually detect yourself errors or inconsistencies. Because it's true that double ceiling is to be checked with the productive hours. Then if you don't calculate productive hours, how do you check the double ceiling? And how do you, there could be several questions that could be raised, let's say, during audits. I think this is what David was mentioning. Thank you.
And also, the declaration is there and can be used today. That's not the point at stake. But we have faced situations in which it's rather tricky. The cases are rather tricky because of the use of the declaration. Remember about when we spoke about the reliability of the time records. When you go into the declaration implies that the person, during the time covered by the declaration, did nothing else for the entity, for the company, or for the university, for the beneficiary, than the work in the action. But when you talk about researchers, people working in research, you very easily can find in Google what they have been done during the last 2, 3, 4 years. So it happens sometimes that we find, just typing the name in Google, that the person, while the declaration was signed, was in a conference for a totally different issue, or was participating in a research team for a different project. And there we have a very, very, very big problem, because at that moment we know the declaration can no longer be trusted, but we have no idea how many hours then can be trusted. So as Sorin explained, then you go into alternative evidence, extremely complex, extremely heavy, and recurrently with high financial adjustments, which imply that in some years' time you have to pay money back, which we all know is quite difficult.
Thank you. We have another question about the recording of timesheets. Digital recording can be digital, right? We have them in an ERP system and can print them if needed. Is that okay?
Sorry, I don't know what is an ERP.
ERP, it it will be like SAP or similar.
Ah.
An integrated. I don't have exactly the name behind.
Yeah.
Integrated IT system with all the modules of accounting, production, and so on, basically.
But again, I think you complement me. Sorry, if you want, the idea is again that we need to be. The system must provide evidence that the person who recorded the hours in the system was actually the person who was concerned, so the employee, and the person and somebody else supervises or countersigned in the system the number of hours that this person encoded. Typically with usernames and passwords should be typically okay. Fine, sorry.
Okay. Next one then, should we divide the 1720 between 12 and then the 143 hours resulting are the working hours per month, or should we divide them if we have somebody on vacation?
Problem here is that I don't know the context of the question, because depending on the context and to what we refer them, the answer might be different. If we are speaking about the declaration, because we were about the declaration, typically what you do is every month covered by the declaration implies 143.33 hours, assuming that you use option 1. I insist, there are 2 other options. 143.33 are the number of hours that are supported by the declaration per month. There are some particularities. If the person is absent in some months, might be to be removed if the person is absent for more than half of the month. If we speak about cappings, we don't care about monthly capping. Remember, the capping is verified per full financial year. And there might be even more context. I think that for that question, yes, please.
Try to
see, I have
just to be sure to have a clarification first, if possible. The method to calculate the personnel cost could be annual or monthly. So if you use annual personnel cost method, then you don't need to divide by 12 to do anything. You just make these checks of the double ceiling, calculation of the hourly rate and the number of hours on an annual basis. You don't need to go to the monthly basis. I don't see it, at least for the moment of the reporting. If you do have a monthly reporting method, a monthly calculation method indeed, then indeed when you use option 1, you should use 143 productive hours per month. Now, the only thing with the vacation, this could be, I see a situation where if you use option 1, 1720, then there is no need to deduct the vacation from the productive hours in the calculation of the hourly rate, right? Because 1720 already takes into account, let's say, the productive hours, meaning outside the holidays and absences and so on. So from there, no, from the down part of the calculation of the hourly rate. However, in the upper part of the calculation, if you use timesheets, then normally the hours spent on vacation, they will not be considered as hours spent on the action, and the hours spent on the action will only be there. So when the person will be on vacation, simply there will be 0 hours for the action. So there is no need to divide you will simply have the actual number. The only exception I see, as David also mentioned, is indeed with monthly calculation, option 1, 1720, and exclusive, which is very, very specific, but okay, may happen, and declaration of exclusive work, in which case you may say that the person was in holiday during that month. But again, there as well, exclusive means exclusive. So I don't think you need to calculate how many hours for the vacation, because you don't need them for the annual calculation, let's say, neither for the probably for the monthly calculation. But there, I don't know if it's clear, but there indeed you may have only the upper part. The down part you already deducted in the 1720. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question is again about electronic signatures. I think we have gone through that.
Yes.
Exactly. And next question then. For natural person, the costs are not significantly different from those for personnel under an employment contract. What is the meaning of significantly?
Or later a court pie.
It's the bigger, the smaller. Maybe we can look at it from the audit perspective. Significantly, it's not much. It's really not much. We're talking about public financing, yeah, European public money. So, not significantly different, meaning very similar. Now, I don't know. Maybe in general, in practice, in the finance environment in general, the materiality levels are very low. I mean, are below. I don't know. I will not quantify it, but significant would mean that a beneficiary in good faith will pay similar, so basically the same, if possible, or very very close amounts of salaries to the natural persons, for example, compared to the employees. Why? Because it's the cost of the employee. Obviously, it's very similar. I wouldn't go further with this, because then the point here is not to abuse of the term significantly, but to really use it prudently from an audit perspective, and really, for yourself to make the assessment of if this is really significantly different or not. If it is significantly different, then you may be prudent and declare this cost as subcontracting or other category of cost, and not as personal cost.
Just from a practical perspective, because perhaps they are too scared now. So we haven't had that many cases in which this has made a problem. I hope that it is because beneficiaries are very careful about this significant difference. But in any case, just to tell you that is something that is not extremely usual, that there are rejections because of that. So you need to check it, but don't be excessively worried if you think that it's reasonable and you are able to justify this difference because the different taxes or the different social security contributions or whatever.
Thank you. We have passed already the 2 hours of webinar. We will have one more last question. Does every timesheet need to be signed every month or every period of 9 or 18 months? Every reporting period?
Every month.
Every month.
Always.
That's a very easy one.
How can be reliable if you sign 9 months later? I can hardly remember what I did last week. How can you remember what you did 9 months before? Well, for 9 months, perhaps you can remember, but for 18 months, surely not.
So every month. Thank you very much, Sorin. Thank you very much, David. And I just want to close up this webinar, just informing that in the same page, there will be the recording, the same page you are watching now. You have the agenda, you have the presentation, you have links to relevant documents, and in a few hours, once our technicians will do some editing in the video, there will be the recording also. And it will be available at least for 2 years there, so you can watch it anytime. I just want to thank again David and Sorin and all the people who are behind actually in the control studio. On the technical side, we have Olivier Margan, who's dealing with the video. We have Emmanuel Krollen, who has been dealing with the Slido. We have Kostas Ziakas, who's organizing this new studio that we are using today. And for the sound, we have Gino Nowi, who's taking care of the sound. So hopefully, he's saying thank you to everybody. We also want to thank you actually for assisting, for being here with us 2 hours. We hope really that this was helpful for you. There are still plenty of questions. Unfortunately, we cannot go through all of them now because of limitation of time, but they are not lost actually. What we do with this question is one of our technicians will tabulate them and will pass them to the experts to see whether these questions are good enough, are repeated enough actually to feed the frequent asked questions of the Funding and Tenders portal. So you may see them there. Otherwise, you have the Research Inquiry Service where you can always go directly with your questions, and they will end up with Sorin or with David most probably. Finally, just to say to you that the next webinars will be announced in the new sections of the Funding and Tenders portal. Most probably the next webinar will be on Horizon Europe and will be probably on the 9th of March. We have reservation here already, but we are still waiting for confirmation from speakers. Speakers will be on dissemination and exploitation. So once we have that, and it will be end of this week, beginning of next week, we will announce it in the Funding and Tenders portal. So we hope to see you there. As you know, there is no need to registration, so you are welcome to pass by. Again, thank you very much for coming, and just take care.
See you next time.
See
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.